Ancient trade routes were built on more than just ambition. They were built on stone, water, and sheer human cleverness. Across continents and centuries, our ancestors faced impossible landscapes. Deserts that stretched for thousands of miles, mountains that scraped the sky, swamps that swallowed everything, and seas that raged without mercy. Yet commerce had to move. Economies had to live, so they built, they engineered, they transformed the very earth beneath their feet. This is a journey through 25 ancient infrastructure projects that did not just defy geography. They mastered it to keep the lifeblood of trade flowing. By the end, you will understand the hidden blueprints of pre-modern globalization, the ingenious solutions that connected worlds. How did a city flourish in the heart of a desert? What does a staircase carved into a jungle mountain have to do with your spice cabinet? The answers lie in roads that were economic lifelines, ports that were fortresses against the sea, and canals that moved mountains of grain. These stories are not merely about forgotten ruins, they are about the relentless drive to connect. What do you think it truly takes to build a network that outlasts an empire? To build a network that outlasts an empire, you must first build a road that can conquer distance itself. The Persian Empire under King Darius I faced this monumental task. His domain stretched from the sun-baked plains of modern-day Iran to the rugged coasts of Turkey, a tapestry of deserts and mountains where communication was slow and rebellion could simmer. His answer was not just a path, but a system. He ordered the construction of the Royal Road, a staggering engineering project that spanned over 1,500 miles from the administrative capital of Susa all the way to Sardis in the west. This was not a single, perfectly straight highway, but a carefully curated network linking existing trails into a cohesive, imperial spine. Its primary purpose was control. Imperial inspectors, tax collectors, and armies could move with unprecedented speed, tying the vast empire together with bands of packed earth and stone. But where authority flows, commerce inevitably follows. The road became the superhighway of the ancient Near East, a vital artery for the movement of luxury goods, bulk commodities, and ideas. What truly made it work, however, was the infrastructure layered on top of the dirt. At regular intervals, way stations were established. These were not simple rest stops, but fortified complexes offering shelter, fresh horses, and supplies for authorized travelers. Here, the empire's legendary mounted courier system operated. A message could travel the entire length of the road in just 7 days, a journey that would take an ordinary caravan 3 months. Think of it as the ancient world's first reliable postal and logistics service, a standardized protocol that ensured a clay tablet from the king arrived with its authority intact. This logistical genius transformed the harsh, arid Iranian plateau and the Anatolian highlands from formidable barriers into connected corridors. The Royal Road was more than a path, it was a statement etched into the landscape. It declared that distance was no longer an excuse. The Royal Road proved that an empire could be held together by the steady rhythm of hooves and footsteps. But to connect entire continents, you needed more than a single imperial highway. You needed a system of oases in the void. This was the genius of the caravanserai. Across the vast, wind-swept deserts and formidable mountain passes of Central Asia, along the sprawling network we now call the Silk Road, these structures were not just stops along the way. They were the very reason the journey was possible at all. Picture a merchant, his camels laden with bolts of Chinese silk or sacks of pungent spices, facing a horizon of endless sand or a narrow, treacherous mountain trail. His greatest enemy was not bandits, though they were a threat, but the sheer, consuming emptiness. A caravanserai was the answer to that emptiness, a promise of survival etched in stone every 25 to 30 miles, the distance a loaded caravan could travel in a single day. Their design was a masterpiece of practical necessity. From the outside, a caravanserai often appeared as a stark, imposing fortress with high, windowless walls of mud, brick, or stone to deter raiders. A single, heavy gate was the only entrance, closed and guarded at night, but inside it was a bustling sanctuary. The central courtyard was a hive of activity, with space for hundreds of camels to be unloaded and tethered. Surrounding this open area were arched alcoves and small rooms where merchants could sleep, store their goods securely, and even conduct business. The caravanserai provided the three things every traveler desperately needed: water from a deep well or cistern, fodder for the animals, and a place to make essential repairs. Blacksmiths, leatherworkers, and veterinarians often set up shop within these walls, turning each stop into a miniature economic hub. This standardized network of safety transformed the lethal distances of the Taklamakan Desert or the Pamir Mountains from impossible barriers into calculated segments. A merchant did not have to brave the whole wilderness, only the manageable stretch to the next fortified haven. It was this repetitive, reliable infrastructure that turned a collection of individual trade paths into a coherent transcontinental pipeline, where a bolt of silk could pass from hand to hand, from caravanserai to caravanserai, all the way from Zion to Antioch. The caravanserai did not just house commerce, it manufactured the confidence required for it to move at all. That confidence in movement, born from desert way stations, found its ultimate expression in stone and law. While the Persian Royal Road was an administrative lifeline, the Romans perfected the very concept of the road as a permanent, unyielding fact of the landscape. Their masterclass began with the Via Appia, the Appian Way, commissioned in 312 BC by the censor Appius Claudius Caecus. It was far more than a simple path. It was a declaration of Roman ambition, built not just to connect but to conquer geography itself. Its initial purpose was military, to speed legions south to secure recently conquered territories. Yet, like all great Roman works, its true legacy became economic. It stretched from the gates of Rome all the way to the vital port of Brundisium on the heel of Italy's boot, the primary embarkation point for Greece and the wealthy eastern provinces. This transformed the Appian Way into Italy's central commercial artery. Countless wagon trains laden with grain from the fertile south, amphorae of wine and olive oil, and luxury goods from across the Mediterranean rumbled along its surface, their taxes and profits flowing directly into the heart of the empire. What made this possible, what allowed this torrent of commerce to flow in all seasons, was an engineering obsession with permanence. Roman road builders did not simply lay down a track. They built a multi-layered masterpiece from the ground up. First, they excavated a trench, a fossa, deep into the earth. This was then filled with a foundation of large, tightly packed stones, the statumen. On top of this, they placed a layer of rubble bound with concrete or clay, the rudus, which provided further stability and crucial drainage. The next layer, the nucleus, was a finer mix of gravel and sand. Finally, the crowning glory was the summum dorsum, the wearing surface. On the Appian Way, this was often made of meticulously fitted, interlocking blocks of hard volcanic basalt, creating that iconic, slightly convex surface that shed rainwater into the drainage ditches running alongside. The result was a road that could withstand torrential rain, freezing winters, and the constant, grinding weight of iron-rimmed wheels and marching legions. It was, in every sense, an all-weather highway, turning the muddy, treacherous trails of the Italian peninsula into a reliable, predictable conveyor belt for empire. The Appian Way set the standard, the template from which thousands of miles of Roman roads would later spread across 3 continents, a network of stone veins that pumped the lifeblood of trade, troops, and ideas long after the empire itself had passed. Stone veins could bind an empire, but stone itself could be woven into the very fabric of a mountain range. While Roman roads mastered the gentle hills of Italy, an empire on the other side of the world faced a far more vertical challenge. The Inca, ruling from their sky-high capital of Cusco, commanded a realm stretched across the spine of the Andes, a landscape of jagged peaks plunging into deep valleys and arid coastal deserts. To connect this impossible geography, they engineered the Qhapaq Ñan, the Royal Road, a network so vast it makes the Roman system seem almost modest. This was not one road, but a coordinated web of stone-paved trails, staircases, and tunnels spanning over 25,000 miles, linking an empire that stretched from modern-day Colombia all the way down to central Chile. Its primary purpose was imperial unity, allowing the Sopa Inca, the divine emperor, to project his power and redistribute resources across his diverse territories. But the true marvel was how it was built to defy the terrain itself. Where a Roman road would contour a hill, the Inca road often went straight over it. They cut stairways directly into cliff faces, built causeways across marshy ground, and carved tunnels through solid rock. For crossing the deep, roaring rivers that cut through the mountains, they engineered perhaps their most iconic structure, the suspension bridge. Made from braided cables of iku grass woven so tightly they could last for decades, these bridges swung high above torrential waters. Each year, communities would undertake a ceremonial renewal, replacing the old cables in a communal effort that was both practical maintenance and a sacred duty. This network was the lifeline for commerce. Llama caravans, the only pack animal capable of surviving the thin air at altitudes over 13,000 feet, were the trucks of this highway. They moved vital goods dictated by the empire's redistributive economy: bolts of finely woven alpaca textiles, sacks of freeze-dried potatoes called chuño, maize from lower valleys, and ceremonial coca leaves from the eastern slopes. But moving goods was only half the system. Information traveled even faster thanks to the chasqui. These were relay runners, young men stationed in small, thatched huts called tambos every few miles along the road. A chasqui would sprint his segment, carrying verbal messages or knotted cord records called quippers, then pass the information to the next waiting runner. This system could move news or commands at a staggering speed of up to 150 miles a day, turning the sprawling, mountainous empire into a tightly coordinated organism. A disruption in the fish supply on the coast or a rebellion in a distant province could be known in Cusco with astonishing speed, allowing for a rapid imperial response. The Qhapaq Ñan was more than a road. It was a nervous system made of stone and grass, where the heartbeat of commerce and command pulsed to the rhythm of running feet on ancient stairs. While the Inca mastered mountains with stone and grass, another civilization faced a different geographic tyranny: the vast, unpredictable distance between its fertile south and its political north. In China, the rhythm of empire beat to a different drum: the steady flow of grain. For centuries, the wealthy, rice-producing Yangtze River basin in the south was separated from the arid northern plains and the capital cities by hundreds of miles of difficult terrain. Moving the colossal quantities of grain needed to feed the imperial court, bureaucracy, and armies was a logistical nightmare overland. The solution was not to conquer the land, but to transform it with water. This was the birth of the Grand Canal, a project of such staggering scale and persistence that its construction unfolded over more than 1,000 years, beginning in the 5th century BC and reaching its greatest extent under the Mongol-led Yuan dynasty. It became the world's longest artificial waterway, a liquid highway stretching over 1,100 miles. Its primary purpose was starkly practical and political: to move tax grain. Each year, a vast armada of government barges would sail north, carrying millions of pounds of rice as tribute, directly fueling the stability of the state. This was the empire's primary economic artery, and control of it meant control of China itself. But as with all great infrastructure, its utility blossomed far beyond its original intent. The canal soon pulsed with commercial life. Merchant vessels joined the official convoys, carrying not just grain, but porcelain, tea, silk, and spices from south to north, and returning with goods like dates, wool, and horses. It became a dynamic cultural corridor, blending dialects, customs, and technologies between China's distinct regions. The engineering that made this possible was a quiet marvel. The canal had to traverse a landscape that was not flat, crossing hills and varying water levels. Early engineers solved this with the invention of the pound lock, a gated chamber that could raise or lower boats between different water levels, a concept that would revolutionize global navigation. An even greater challenge was water itself, ensuring the canal had enough, especially across its higher, arid northern sections. The solution was a system of reservoirs and feeder canals that channeled water from rivers and lakes, a delicate, managed hydrology that required constant maintenance and oversight. The Grand Canal did not just connect 2 points on a map, it forcibly stitched together the 2 disparate halves of a civilization, the wet, productive south and the dry, administrative north, creating a single, integrated economic organism. It turned geography from a divisive force into a connective one, proving that with enough will and water, even the most fundamental landscapes of a nation could be redesigned to serve human ambition. Water, not stone, was the true foundation of Petra's wealth. In the heart of the Jordanian desert, a city of breathtaking rose-red cliffs emerged not in spite of its arid location, but because of it. The Nabateans were not just master carvers, they were hydrological geniuses who transformed a seasonal death trap into a permanent, flourishing oasis. Their entire economy as a trade hub, controlling the lucrative incense routes for frankincense and myrrh, depended on one critical resource they had to manufacture themselves: a reliable water supply in a land that saw rain only in violent, unpredictable bursts. Their solution was a city-wide machine designed to capture, control, and conserve every single drop. The system began high in the surrounding hills, where they constructed an intricate network of diversion dams and channels. These were not meant to hold water back for long, but to redirect the devastating force of flash floods. When the rare desert rains came, these structures would siphon the raging torrents away from the city's vulnerable heart and into a predetermined course. This water was then funneled into a vast, hidden infrastructure of channels and ceramic pipelines that ran along the cliffs and even through the solid rock. These pipes, made of interlocking terracotta segments, were remarkably efficient, minimizing evaporation loss as they transported water over long distances. The captured floodwater would finally be delivered to over 200 cisterns, both public and private, carved directly into the sandstone bedrock. These were not simple holes, they were carefully plastered reservoirs that could hold millions of gallons, creating a strategic water bank to last through years of drought. This meant that a merchant caravan arriving from the punishing Arabian desert, its camels parched and its precious cargo of frankincense resin needing protection, would find not just a spectacular city, but a guaranteed sanctuary. There was water to drink, water to bathe in, and water to process the goods. The valuable resins and spices could be cleaned, sorted, and repackaged in a stable, well-supplied environment. The Nabateans did not fight their harsh landscape, they learned its brutal rhythm and built a symphony of stone and clay to play it to their advantage. Their greatest monument was not the treasury, but the silence of a full cistern in the dry season, a silence that spoke of absolute control. But a city carved from rock could only control the desert. A true empire needed to command the sea. For Rome, the greatest city the ancient world had ever known, its very survival depended on a lifeline stretching across the Mediterranean. Every year, a fleet of massive grain ships, the Navicularii, sailed from the fertile fields of Egypt and North Africa. Their cargo was nothing less than the city's bread, the free grain ration that fed hundreds of thousands of Roman citizens and kept the sprawling metropolis from unrest. Yet Rome itself, built 15 miles inland on the muddy banks of the Tiber River, had a fatal flaw. Its natural river port was woefully inadequate for the colossal ships of the grain fleet. The river mouth silted up constantly, creating treacherous sandbars, and the open roadstead off the coast was a death trap during the fierce winter storms of the Tyrrhenian Sea. Ships foundered, cargoes were lost, and the city's hunger loomed as a constant political threat. Emperor Claudius, facing this crisis in the 1st century, did not seek a better river port. He decided to build a new sea, or at least a piece of one. His engineers began construction of an artificial harbor complex just north of the Tiber's mouth, a bold venture called Portus. The centerpiece was a massive, curving breakwater, or mole, built out into the open sea using a revolutionary technique. They filled enormous wooden ships with concrete, sailed them to the designated spot, and deliberately sank them, creating a permanent, submerged foundation. On top of this, they raised a towering lighthouse, the Portus Lighthouse, rivaling the famed Pharos of Alexandria, to guide ships safely into the new haven. This outer harbor captured calm water from the chaotic sea, but the problem of silt followed them. The trapped water had little circulation, and the relentless sediment from the Tiber began to choke Claudius's great work. It was Emperor Trajan, decades later, who provided the elegant final solution. He ordered the excavation of a vast, hexagonal inner basin, connected to Claudius's outer harbor by canals. This hexagon was not just for show, it was a hydrodynamic masterpiece. Its shape created constant water circulation, scouring the basin floor and preventing silt from settling. Ships could now unload directly onto its paved wharves, their grain transferred to smaller river barges for the final, safe journey up the Tiber to Rome's warehouses. This two-stage system, the outer breakwater battling the storms and the inner hexagon battling the silt, transformed Portus into the ancient world's most sophisticated logistical hub. It was more than a port, it was a precision instrument for supply. Here, the grain of entire provinces was weighed, taxed, and stored in monumental granaries before flowing into the city's stomach. The steady rhythm of cranes and carts at Portus was the sound of imperial stability, a man-made answer to the unpredictable wrath of nature, ensuring that Rome's greatest vulnerability, its dependence on distant bread, was secured by concrete, geometry, and sheer human will. Rome's artificial harbor was a monument to imperial logistics, but centuries earlier, a very different power had mastered the sea through a network of natural havens. On the sun-drenched island of Crete, the Minoan civilization did not build a single great port, they engineered an entire coastline to serve their ships. This was not an empire of legions and roads, but a thalassocracy, a maritime realm where power flowed with the currents and trade winds. Their harbors, like those at Commos and Amnisos, were not accidental shelters but sophisticated, integrated machines for commerce. At Commos, on Crete's southern shore, archaeologists found not just a simple dock, but a massive L-shaped breakwater constructed of massive, unshaped boulders, a brute force wall against the open Mediterranean swell. This created a calm anchorage, but the true genius lay inland. Behind the protected beach, the Minoans built long, narrow buildings with colonnaded fronts, structures identified as ship sheds. Here, their sleek, oared trading vessels could be hauled safely ashore for maintenance, repair, and protection during winter storms, ensuring the fleet was always ready for the next sailing season. Nearby stood substantial warehouse complexes with magazines for storage, where goods could be kept dry and secure. Amnisos, serving the great palace of Knossos on the north coast, displayed similar foresight, with its own breakwater system turning a river mouth into a reliable port. This infrastructure created a seamless circuit. A ship could take on cargo at one harbor, sail to another Minoan outpost or distant trading partner, and return to a guaranteed safe haven with facilities to turn its new acquisitions around quickly. It enabled Crete to become the central exchange of the Bronze Age Mediterranean. Their distinctive pottery, with its vibrant octopus and dolphin motifs, has been found from Egypt to Sardinia. In return, their warehouses brimmed with imported treasures, ingots of Cypriot copper, Egyptian gold and ivory, Anatolian silver, and precious stones. This constant, protected flow of goods fueled the dazzling palaces and sophisticated culture of the Minoans. Their harbors were the physical synapses of a trading network, where every breakwater and ship shed amplified their reach, turning the entire island into a bustling, unsinkable marketplace that dominated the sea lanes for centuries. The Minoans built their empire on safe harbors, but what if the greatest danger was the sea voyage itself? For ancient Greek merchants, a journey from Athens to the west presented a terrifying choice. You could risk the long, 200-mile voyage around the southern tip of the Peloponnese, a region notorious for its sudden, violent storms and treacherous rocky shores that claimed countless ships. Or you could take a shortcut. At the narrowest point of mainland Greece, a slim neck of land just 4 miles wide connected the Peloponnese to the rest of the country. This was the Isthmus of Corinth, a geographic bottleneck separating the Aegean Sea from the Ionian Sea. Sailing around it was a marathon of peril, but crossing it seemed impossible. The Corinthians, ever the savvy traders, saw this not as a barrier but as a business opportunity. Sometime around the 6th century BC, they engineered a solution that was breathtaking in its simplicity and sheer physical audacity. They built the Diolkos. This was not a road for carts or caravans, but a stone-paved trackway, a specialized railway for ships. Grooves were cut into the limestone paving stones, creating parallel ruts a consistent 5 feet apart. When a merchant vessel arrived at one side of the isthmus, its cargo would often be unloaded. But for smaller, lighter warships or valuable merchant craft, the Corinthians had a different process. The ship itself would be hauled out of the water and onto a massive, wheeled cradle. Teams of oxen or gangs of enslaved laborers would then drag this incredible load, ship and all, along the grooved trackway. The ruts guided the wheels, preventing the heavy cradle from veering off course as it inched its way across the 4-mile divide. At the other side, the ship would be refloated, ready to sail into the opposite sea. Think of it as the world's first and most dramatic portage, a ship railway. The economic impact was immediate and profound. A journey that could take over a week of dangerous sailing was reduced to a matter of hours. This made the transport of perishable goods, like certain foodstuffs, suddenly viable over this route. It allowed naval fleets to be transferred quickly between eastern and western theaters of conflict. Most importantly, it gave the city-state of Corinth a stranglehold on a vital commercial choke point. They could charge tolls for the service, control who used the trackway, and cement their position as a dominant middleman in Mediterranean trade. The Diolkos was the ancient precursor to a canal, a temporary, labor-intensive solution to a permanent geographic problem. It proved that if you could not move the water to the ship, you could, with enough grit and ingenuity, move the ship to the water, turning a peninsula into a throughway. The Diolkos was a triumph of brute force over geography, but a far more elegant solution to the same problem lay buried for millennia. In the dry earth of modern-day Gujarat, India, archaeologists uncovered something that rewrote our understanding of early maritime engineering. At the ancient city of Lothal, a part of the enigmatic Indus Valley civilization, they found not just a port, but a fully functional, brick-lined dockyard dating back over 4,000 years. This was not a simple riverbank where boats were pulled ashore. It was a precisely calculated machine designed to work in harmony with the rhythms of the sea. The dock was a massive, rectangular basin, dug out and lined with kiln-fired bricks set in water-resistant gypsum mortar. Its most ingenious feature was a system to manage the tidal waters of the nearby Sabarmati River, which would have been connected to the Arabian Sea in antiquity. A cleverly engineered lock gate, likely made of wood, could be opened or closed to control the flow of water into the dock. When the high tide rushed in, the gate would be opened, allowing the basin to fill and raise the ships inside to a convenient level for unloading. When the tide receded, the gate could be closed, trapping the precious water inside and preventing the ships from settling into the mud. But what about excess water from monsoon rains? The builders thought of that too. They included a spill channel, a kind of safety valve that could divert extra water away from the dock to prevent flooding. Nearby, a large, raised brick platform served as a loading and unloading wharf, where goods could be efficiently transferred from ship to warehouse without ever touching the muddy ground. This entire complex speaks of a society with profound nautical knowledge and administrative foresight. Lothal was a vital hub in a vast trade network. From this engineered dock, Indus Valley merchants exported beautifully crafted beads of carnelian and steatite, intricately etched seals, and cotton textiles. In return, their warehouses received goods from distant Mesopotamia, things like copper, tin, and precious lapis lazuli. The dock at Lothal was more than a place to park boats. It was a calibrated instrument of commerce, transforming the unpredictable pulse of the tide into a reliable metronome for trade, ensuring that even 4,000 years ago, the global exchange of goods could run on schedule. That calibrated rhythm of the tide at Lothal gave way to a different kind of order, one written not in bricks but in policy. Centuries later, in the fertile expanse of the Indian subcontinent, a new empire perfected the art of the road as a tool of statecraft. The Mauryan Empire, under its visionary advisor Chanakya, understood that control was not merely about conquest, but about seamless connection. His political treatise, the Arthashastra, reads less like a philosophical text and more like an ancient administrator's manual, and within its detailed chapters lies the blueprint for one of history's first truly systematic road networks. These were not just paths worn by countless feet, they were official state assets, the trunk roads that bound the empire's heart in the Gangetic Plain to its distant, vital frontiers in the northwest. Their purpose was dual: to speed the march of armies, to quell unrest, and to accelerate the flow of commerce that filled the imperial coffers. But the Mauryan genius lay in the thoughtful, almost paternalistic details of their maintenance. The Arthashastra explicitly orders the planting of shade trees along these routes, banyan and mango trees that would offer respite from the blistering sun to soldiers, merchants, and pilgrims alike. It mandated the construction of rest houses at regular intervals, providing shelter and safety for travelers far from home. And with remarkable foresight, it called for the placement of stone pillars as mile markers, standardizing distance and bringing predictable order to long, uncertain journeys. This was infrastructure designed with the human experience at its core. A merchant carrying spices from the south or textiles from the east could plan his journey not just by the stars, but by the reliable presence of the next shady grove or secure shelter. The movement of imperial troops became a matter of precise logistics rather than a grueling trial. These roads, particularly the grand route connecting the capital Pataliputra to the northwestern city of Taxila, became superhighways of culture and commerce. Ideas, religious movements, and artistic styles flowed along these shaded avenues as freely as the caravans of goods. The Mauryan trunk roads demonstrate that the most enduring infrastructure considers not just the destination, but the dignity and efficiency of the journey itself, transforming the very act of travel from a hardship into a managed and even somewhat civilized enterprise. Deep in the northern forests, a journey began with a piece of sunlight trapped in stone. Amber, that golden, fossilized resin prized for its beauty and supposed mystical properties had to travel from the chilly shores of the Baltic Sea to the warm, wealthy markets of the Mediterranean. Between these two worlds lay a formidable obstacle course, a vast, trackless wilderness of ancient forests, wide rivers and bogs that seemed to swallow paths whole. The Amber Road was not a single paved highway, but a sprawling, organic network of trails, a testament to the human impulse to connect supply with demand across the most unpromising terrain. Its infrastructure was born from necessity, carved not by imperial decree, but by countless footsteps seeking the path of least resistance. To move this lightweight but incredibly valuable cargo, traders developed a relay system that turned the landscape's challenges into a sequence of manageable stages. They followed the natural contours of the land, tracing ridges above swampy lowlands and utilizing frozen rivers in winter as natural highways. The true bottlenecks, and thus the points where infrastructure crystallized, were the river crossings. At strategic fords along major rivers like the Vistula and the Oder, communities established ferry points and built primitive bridges of logs and stone. These crossings became natural hubs, places where tolls could be collected and where simple trading posts would grow. As traffic increased, these posts often evolved into fortified settlements, wooden stockades that offered protection for merchants and their precious goods. Places like Trousseau in modern Poland or Wyszkieton in what is now Kaliningrad began as way stations on the Amber Trail and grew into significant commercial centers. The road itself was rarely more than a widened path through the primeval forest, a corridor kept open by constant use. Guides familiar with the subtle markers, a bent tree here, a distinctive rock formation there, were as vital as the amber itself. This entire network functioned as a continent-spanning supply chain, moving raw Baltic amber south to workshops in places like Aquileia at the head of the Adriatic Sea, where artisans transformed it into beads, amulets, and intricate carvings for Roman elites. The Amber Road proves that commerce does not always require grand monuments. Sometimes it needs only a reliable path through the dark woods and a safe place to cross the river. The dark forests of the north gave way to a far more absolute emptiness. South of the Mediterranean's fertile coast lay a barrier so vast and severe it seemed to defy human passage entirely, the Sahara Desert. This was not a simple expanse of sand, but a sea of desolation over 3 million square miles of scorching dunes, gravel plains, and sun-blasted rock. Yet for millennia, caravans of camels, sometimes thousands strong, crossed this void. They moved the wealth of continents, carrying gold north from the kingdoms of West Africa and salt south from the mines of the desert itself. Their survival and the entire economy they supported depended on a fragile, scattered infrastructure not of stone but of water and shade. This was the network of the Saharan oases. These were not mere watering holes but meticulously cultivated, fortified island cities in an ocean of sand. Places like Siwa in Egypt or Ghadaims in Libya were miracles of human persistence. Their existence began with a fracture in the desert's bedrock, a place where ancient groundwater, sometimes fossil water trapped for millennia, could be reached. Communities dug deep wells, some descending hundreds of feet, to tap this lifeblood. Around these springs, they planted dense groves of date palms. The palms were the engine of the oasis, their broad fronds providing crucial shade that lowered the ground temperature and reduced evaporation. Beneath this canopy, a second layer of fruit trees like figs and pomegranates could grow, and below that, vegetables and grains were cultivated in small, irrigated plots. An oasis was a vertical, layered garden engineered to maximize every drop of water, but its role was fundamentally commercial. It was a resupply station, a caravanserai built by nature and enhanced by human hands. A caravan arriving after weeks in the desert was a desperate entity. Its camels needed water and fodder. its human travelers needed food, rest, and often medical care. The Oasis provided all this. More than that, it was a secure marketplace. The high mud brick walls that surrounded settlements like Gadames, with their labyrinthine, covered alleyways, were not just for defense against raiders. They created a controlled environment for trade. Here, in the cool shadows of its streets, goods could be safely unpacked, evaluated, and exchanged. North African merchants would trade salt, a mineral so vital for preserving food it was literally worth its weight in gold, for the precious gold dust, ivory, and kola nuts brought up from the south. The oasis dwellers themselves became essential middlemen, providing guides who knew the shifting dunes, repairing saddles and waterskins, and taxing the trade that flowed through their gates. This network transformed the Sahara from an impenetrable barrier into a connective sea of sand, its terrifying distances broken into manageable segments between islands of green. The pulse of this trade, however, was measured in more than just commodities. The movement of people was its darkest current. The demand for labor, both in the agricultural oases themselves and across the Mediterranean world, meant that individuals were also transported under conditions of great hardship along these routes, a tragic and integral part of the economic system that built empires and enriched kingdoms. The legacy of the Saharan networks is thus a complex tapestry, woven with threads of extraordinary human adaptation and profound human cost, all flowing along the same precarious lines between the wells. The relentless pulse of trade across the Sahara depended on scattered oases, but in the very cradle of civilization, water was not a scarce treasure to be hoarded. It was a chaotic force to be tamed and directed. Between the twin rivers of the Tigris and Euphrates lay Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers. This was not a landscape of natural abundance, but a flat, sun-baked plain subject to brutal, unpredictable floods and scorching droughts. To build the world's first cities here, the Sumerians, and later the Babylonians and Assyrians, had to become master hydraulic engineers. Their greatest infrastructure achievement was not a single monument, but a vast, living network of canals that veins the entire region. These waterways began as simple ditches for irrigation, diverting river water to nourish fields of barley and date palms, transforming the arid plain into the fertile crescent. But their purpose quickly expanded. The Mesopotamians realized that these same canals that fed their fields could also become their highways. In a land devoid of stone and quality timber, the rivers were the only practical way to move the massive quantities of heavy materials needed to build ziggurats, temples, and city walls. They began to dig larger, deeper canals specifically for transport, connecting major urban centers like Uruk, and Babylon into an integrated economic web. Imagine a barge not sailing down a wild river but gliding along a calm, man-made waterway. It might be loaded with immense blocks of limestone quarried from distant hills or giant cedar logs floated down from the mountains of Lebanon. These barges, guided by poles and sails, moved with an efficiency impossible for ox carts over the soft, muddy ground. Grain, the foundation of the economy, could be shipped from rural estates directly to the granaries of the city-state, feeding a dense, non-farming population of priests, administrators, and craftsmen. This canal network turned geography on its head. The very flatness of the plain, which made overland travel difficult, made canal construction relatively straightforward. The rivers provided the water and human labor provided the direction. Maintaining this system was a central duty of the king, a proof of his divine mandate to bring order to chaos. Scribes kept meticulous records of canal dredging and repair, for a silted-up canal meant a city cut off from its food and building supplies. These waterways became the arteries of empire, allowing the Assyrians, for instance, to project power and move troops and supplies across great distances. The Mesopotamian canal system was more than agricultural infrastructure. It was the world's first coordinated logistics network, proving that by rewriting the map with water, you could build not just a city, but an entire civilization in a landscape that offered no favors. Mesopotamia's canals mastered the flat river plain, but to truly command the sea required a different kind of audacity. The Phoenicians, a people squeezed between the mountains of Lebanon and the Mediterranean, faced a coastline with few natural deep-water harbors. Their survival depended not on taming a river, but on defying the open ocean itself. Their answer was to build harbors from scratch, turning barren offshore islands and shallow coastlines into impregnable fortresses of trade. At cities like Tyre and Sidon, they performed what can only be called maritime alchemy, using advanced masonry to create artificial ports that were engineering marvels of their age. The design was brilliantly systematic. They would construct massive seawalls and breakwaters of immense, finely fitted stone blocks, often extending out from an island or the mainland to enclose a patch of turbulent sea. Within this protective embrace, they frequently built not one but two harbors, a northern harbor and a southern harbor, each with a specialized purpose. One might serve for military vessels, the quick, sleek biremes that protected their trade routes, while the other was dedicated to commercial shipping. These basins were further refined with inner quays and landing stages of stone, where ships could tie up securely regardless of the weather churning the sea beyond the walls. The most famous example was Tyre, originally built on an island. The Phoenicians fortified this island city and constructed two harbors, one facing south toward Egypt and the other north toward Sidon and the wider Mediterranean. The southern harbor was particularly noted for its narrow, easily defended entrance, a bottleneck that could be sealed with chains. This infrastructure transformed a rocky island into an unsinkable aircraft carrier of ancient commerce. Within these calm, engineered harbors, the Phoenician economic machine hummed. Their ships were loaded with legendary goods, vivid purple dye extracted from the murex snail, a process so noxious the dye works were placed downwind of the cities, brilliant glassware, and the strong, fragrant cedar wood from the Lebanese mountains that was coveted by every empire from Egypt to Assyria for building temples and palaces. The harbors were not just shelters, they were secure processing and packaging zones. Raw materials could be landed, transformed into finished goods in nearby workshops, and then reloaded onto outbound vessels with ruthless efficiency, all safe from storms and pirates. This guaranteed, all-weather capability allowed the Phoenicians to establish a web of trading colonies across the Mediterranean, from Carthage in North Africa to Cadiz in Spain. Their artificial harbors were the stable, unshakable home bases from which they launched their exploration of the world, proving that with enough stone and ingenuity, you could build the very bedrock of maritime empire where nature had provided none. Yet beyond the engineered harbors of the Phoenicians, the true wealth of the ancient world often moved inland, along a backbone of stone running through the high desert. The King's Highway, known to the Romans as the Via Appia, was the Levant's central nervous system. This was not a single, purpose-built road like the Appian Way, but an ancient trackway that evolved over millennia into a formal corridor. It traced a vital line along the elevated plateau east of the Jordan River and the Dead Sea, a ribbon of life running from the Nile Delta in Egypt all the way to Damascus in Syria. Its path was dictated by sheer survival. To the west lay the impassable Rift Valley and the harsh, waterless deserts of the Sinai and Negev. To the east stretched the vast, empty Arabian desert. The King's Highway navigated the narrow, habitable strip in between, a rugged, semi-arid landscape of rolling hills and seasonal streams where settlements could cling to existence. This geography made it the indispensable connector between the great river civilizations of Egypt and the Mesopotamian powers to the northeast. Armies marched along it from the pharaohs to the Assyrians. But its enduring legacy was commerce. It became the premier overland route for the most precious cargo of the ancient world, frankincense and myrrh. These aromatic resins, harvested from scraggly trees in southern Arabia, had to travel north to reach the wealthy markets of the Mediterranean. The Nabateans, those masters of desert hydrology from Petra, understood the highway's value completely. They did not just use the road, they upgraded it. They built way stations, carved cisterns into the rock to capture precious rainwater, and established guard posts to protect the caravans from raiders, transforming a perilous track into a somewhat managed and protected journey. The Romans, upon absorbing the region into their empire, applied their signature engineering rigor. They paved long sections with stone, built sturdy bridges over seasonal flood channels, and installed formal milestones. The Roman iteration, the Via Regia, turned this ancient path into a reliable, all-weather imperial highway. This reliability was everything for luxury trade. A merchant carrying a load of fragile frankincense tears could now calculate his journey with greater certainty. The road's infrastructure meant access to guaranteed water, safer overnight stops, and a surface that wouldn't vanish in a rainstorm. Along this improved highway flowed not just incense, but a stream of other high-value goods, spices from the east, Egyptian linen, Arabian gold, and Mediterranean purple dye. Cities like Philadelphia, modern-day Amman, flourished as toll stations and commercial hubs along this route. The King's Highway demonstrates how a natural geographic corridor, when enhanced by successive empires seeking control and profit, can become a permanent channel for civilization itself, where the scent of sacred incense was carried on a road built by kings and merchants. While the King's Highway channeled the wealth of continents, in the heart of Mesoamerica, a city designed its own universe in stone. Teotihuacan, the place where the gods were born, was a metropolis of staggering scale and geometric precision, home to over 100,000 people at its height. Its most iconic feature, the Avenue of the Dead, was far more than a sacred pathway for ritual processions. This immense central axis, running for miles and flanked by the colossal Pyramid of the Sun and the Pyramid of the Moon, functioned as the city's primary economic engine, a monumental piece of infrastructure engineered to control the flow of people and goods. The entire city was laid out on a precise grid, a radical feat of urban planning that aligned with celestial movements. The Avenue of the Dead served as the rigid spine of this grid, with streets intersecting at perfect right angles to create distinct districts. This wasn't haphazard growth, it was a master plan, and at the very heart of this plan, near where the avenue widens into a great plaza, archaeologists have uncovered evidence of a massive central marketplace. Imagine this space not as empty ceremonial ground, but as a vibrant, bustling hub. Vendors from across the Valley of Mexico and far beyond would have gathered here under temporary awnings or within designated stalls. The grid layout ensured that foot traffic from every residential compound and workshop district was funneled efficiently toward this central point. Farmers from the fertile fields surrounding the city would bring their maize, beans, and squash. Artisans from specialized neighborhoods would arrive with their wares, but Teotihuacan's true economic power was built on two key exports, obsidian and pottery. The city sat atop rich deposits of high-quality obsidian, a volcanic glass sharper than surgical steel. Workshops near the Avenue of the Dead would have been frenzied places, with skilled craftsmen napping this material into razor-sharp blades, projectile points, and ritual objects. The standardized pottery of Teotihuacan, with its distinctive thin orange ware and elaborate tripod vessels, was also mass-produced and highly prized. The wide, straight avenue was the distribution channel for all of this industry. Processions of porters, moving in an orderly fashion dictated by the city's design, would carry baskets of prismatic obsidian cores and stacks of fine pottery from the workshops to the grand market. From there, goods were loaded onto the backs of long-distance traders who would follow routes stretching south to the Maya lands and north to the deserts. The Avenue of the Dead, therefore, was a sacred road that also functioned as a colossal conveyor belt. It transformed raw materials from the valley and the distant hinterlands into finished products, and then channeled those products into the bloodstream of a vast trade network. In Teotihuacan, commerce was not an afterthought. It was built into the very alignment of the streets, a divine geometry that served a profoundly earthly purpose. A sacred avenue could channel the wealth of a valley, but to unite two seas required moving a continent. In the dense, rain-soaked forests of 8th century Germany, a king conceived a plan of breathtaking scale. Charlemagne, ruler of the vast Frankish Empire, sought a direct water link between two of Europe's greatest rivers, the Rhine and the Danube. His vision was to create a navigable canal, later known as the Fossa Carolina or Charlemagne's Ditch, that would connect the watersheds flowing to the North Sea with those flowing to the Black Sea. This was not merely a local improvement. It was an attempt to stitch the very geography of Europe together, creating an unbroken water highway from the Atlantic approaches to the gates of Byzantium. The strategic and commercial prize was immense. It would allow goods, troops, and imperial authority to flow through the heart of his realm without the perilous overland portage that broke journeys at this continental divide. The site chosen was a narrow strip of land near modern-day Trutschlingen, where the Swabian Rizat River, a tributary of the Main and eventually the Rhine, came tantalizingly close to the Altmühl, which flowed into the Danube. The plan was audaciously simple: dig a trench to connect them, but the reality was a monumental struggle against mud, water, and gravity. Thousands of laborers, likely soldiers and local peasants, were marshaled for the task. They worked with iron shovels and wooden carts, attempting to excavate a canal roughly 2,000 feet long and, according to some estimates, up to 100 feet wide. The earthworks they moved were staggering, a testament to sheer political will. They dug deep into the soggy ground, piling the earth into high embankments on either side. Yet the landscape fought back. The water table in the low-lying area was treacherously high. As the workers dug, the trench persistently filled with groundwater and rainwater, turning the site into a quagmire. The soft, unstable soil of the embankments constantly threatened to slump back into the excavation. The fundamental engineering challenge, one that the technology of the time could not overcome, was maintaining a stable, navigable channel across this soggy, shifting divide. Without reliable methods for building locks to manage the subtle changes in elevation or for constructing permanent, watertight retaining walls, the project was ultimately defeated by its own ambition. After a massive effort, the canal was either abandoned incomplete or soon silted up and became unusable. Yet the failure of the Fossa Carolina is perhaps more illuminating than many successes. It reveals a medieval mind thinking on an imperial, continental scale, attempting to redraw the hydrological map of Europe through force of labor. It was a vision that would not be fully realized for over 1,000 years until the modern main Danube Canal was completed in the 20th century. Charlemagne's Ditch stands as a ghost in the landscape, a muddy testament to the timeless human desire to make rivers obey and to connect the world's seas with a ditch dug by hand. Charlemagne's vision of connecting seas faltered in the mud, but high in the frozen peaks of the Alps, another essential trade was carved into the living rock. Salt was not a luxury, it was a biological necessity, the only reliable means to preserve meat and fish through the long, dark winters. This simple mineral shaped empires and forged paths across some of Europe's most formidable terrain. Deep within the Austrian Alps, places like Hallstatt and the town that would take its name from this trade, Salzburg or Salt Castle, sat atop vast underground deposits of rock salt. Mining it was a brutal, claustrophobic endeavor, with tunnels dug deep into the mountains using fire and primitive tools, but extracting the salt was only the beginning. The true challenge was getting it to the hungry markets of the Mediterranean world, hundreds of miles to the south over a jagged, snow-choked barrier. This gave rise to the ancient salt roads, a web of high-altitude trails threading through passes like the vital Brenner Pass. These were not roads in any Roman sense, at least not at first. They were narrow, treacherous tracks worn by countless hooves and footsteps, often tracing the paths of migrating animals. A merchant's journey was a battle against the elements, navigating sheer cliffs, crossing roaring glacial streams on precarious log bridges, and facing sudden, blinding blizzards even in summer. To make this passage possible, a specialized infrastructure evolved. Simple stone shelters called senhuten or saltnerhuten were built at strategic points along the routes. These were rudimentary refuges, little more than 3 walls and a roof, where a caravan could huddle for a night, protected from the wind and snow. Over time, these grew into more substantial way stations, often managed by monastic orders who saw providing sanctuary as a sacred duty. Here, men and pack animals could find minimal rest, fodder, and sometimes even rudimentary blacksmith services to repair broken horseshoes or wagon fittings. The pack animals themselves were the unsung heroes of this trade. Trains of sure-footed mules and hardy Haflinger horses, each carrying 2 heavy sacks of salt in panniers, became a moving, breathing conveyor belt across the sky. The economic gravity was irresistible. Salt from the north was traded for southern goods that could not be produced in the Alpine climate: olive oil from Italy, wine, dried fruits, and fine textiles. This exchange did more than fill larders, it created a cultural corridor. The wealth from the salt trade funded the stunning Gothic and Baroque architecture of cities like Salzburg and Innsbruck. Later, recognizing the immense value of this commerce, authorities began to formalize the routes. They paved the most treacherous sections with stone, creating the Somphad or pack animal path, a dedicated, improved roadway that could handle small carts. This incremental infrastructure, from a simple shelter to a paved track, transformed a seasonal, perilous gamble into a regulated, year-round enterprise. The salt that flowed down from the Alps did more than preserve food. It preserved communities, connecting the isolated valleys of the north to the wider pulse of Mediterranean civilization, proving that even the mightiest mountains could be crossed when what lay on the other side was essential to life itself. The salt that preserved civilizations flowed from mountains, but in the tropical heat of Sri Lanka, preserving water itself was the ultimate act of creation. The island's dry zone presented a paradox, a land of lush potential subjected to a merciless cycle of torrential monsoon rains followed by months of searing drought. To build a thriving agrarian society here, the Sinhalese kingdoms engineered not a single monument, but an entire landscape. They built the tank cascade system, a breathtakingly sophisticated network of human-made reservoirs called tanks, connected by a web of canals and spillways. This was rural infrastructure on a grand, ecological scale. The genius lay in its cascading design. Engineers would identify a natural valley or depression in the gently rolling plains. They would construct an earthen dam or bund across its lower end, often reinforced with stone. This created the largest reservoir, the primary tank that captured the initial monsoon deluge. But the system did not stop there. Excess water from this primary tank would be carefully released through a stone sluice gate, not wasted, but channeled via a canal to fill a smaller secondary tank further down the slope. From that tank, water might flow to another and another, creating a chain of reservoirs that stair-stepped down the topography. This cascading design served multiple brilliant purposes. It captured and stored rainwater with incredible efficiency, preventing runoff from simply flooding away. It controlled the force of the water, reducing erosion and siltation in the lower tanks. And it created a graduated system of water security, where different villages along the cascade had access to their own community tank, fostering local management and shared responsibility. The water was life for paddy fields. Elaborate canal networks, some lined with stone, distributed this stored water to vast complexes of rice terraces. This technological mastery transformed the dry zone into a breadbasket, enabling not just one, but often 2 or even 3 rice harvests per year. This was the foundation of economic power. The massive agricultural surplus did more than feed local populations. It became a prime commodity for trade. Sri Lankan rice, along with other goods like cinnamon and precious gems, could be exported across the Indian Ocean, bringing wealth and stability to the kingdoms. The tank cascade system was a testament to foresight, a decentralized, community-based answer to climatic uncertainty that turned a region of harsh extremes into a resilient, enduring engine of prosperity. Water stored in a tank could feed a city, but water in motion could power an empire. In the heart of Rome, the true miracle was not just the availability of water, but its relentless, engineered flow. The aqueducts, those soaring arcs of stone we remember as symbols of grandeur, were in fact the most practical of machines. While their primary gift was clean drinking water and sanitation, their secondary effect was to supercharge the commercial heart of the city in ways that are easy to overlook. Take the Aqua Claudia, one of Rome's greatest, begun by Emperor Caligula and finished by Claudius. It did not simply end in a reservoir, it was integrated into the very metabolism of urban industry. After supplying the imperial palaces and public baths, its water was harnessed for raw economic power. One of its branches fed the Janiculum Hill, where a complex of water-powered grain mills, the Molony, turned day and night. Here, the constant, forceful flow of the aqueduct turned massive wooden wheels, which in turn ground wheat into flour on an industrial scale. This was the ancient equivalent of a centralized food processing plant, turning the vital grain shipments from porters into the bread that fed 1 million people. Without this hydraulic power, Rome would have relied on animal or human-driven mills, a slow, inefficient bottleneck for a metropolis of its size. But the aqueducts did more than grind grain. Their channels were tapped to supply entire industrial districts. In the Transtiberum region, across the Tiber, tanneries and fulleries, the workshops for processing leather and cleaning woolen cloth required vast quantities of water. The aqueducts provided a clean, reliable stream for these messy, essential trades. Dye works, too, depended on consistent water for rinsing fabrics to set their vibrant colors. By delivering this resource directly to these districts, the aqueducts allowed noxious but economically vital industries to operate at scale, away from residential areas, yet still within the commercial orbit of the city. Perhaps most subtly, the aqueducts fed the countless public fountains that bubbled at nearly every major street corner and marketplace. This was not merely a civic amenity, it was a commercial lubricant. A merchant in the bustling Forum Boarium, the cattle market, or the Trajan's market complex could water his animals, clean his goods, and refresh himself without ever leaving the commercial flow. The constant background murmur of flowing water in the markets meant business never had to pause for thirst. This infrastructure allowed Rome to explode beyond the natural limits of the Tiber. A city no longer needed to cling to a riverbank for survival. It could be built on hills, its size limited only by its engineers' ability to bring water to it. The aqueducts transformed Rome from a large settlement into a hyper-dense, fully functional commercial engine, where water did not just sustain life, it drove the relentless wheels of production and trade, turning a political capital into an economic phenomenon the world had never seen. The relentless flow of water in Rome's aqueducts powered a metropolis, but in the remote, cloud-shrouded mountains of Laos, the only power available was that of the human hand against solid rock. Here, in the dense, misty jungles of the Annamite Range, an ancient staircase ascends into the clouds. This is the Phar-that Luang Pass, a monumental stone staircase carved directly into the mountainside, a piece of infrastructure so audacious it seems to defy both gravity and reason. This was not a road for chariots or carts, but a vertical pathway for porters and their precious burdens, a critical artery connecting two distinct worlds. To the west lay the fertile, sprawling Mekong River Valley, a cradle of civilization and trade. To the east, beyond the jagged green peaks, was access to the Vietnamese coast and the bustling maritime networks of the South China Sea. The past did not conquer the mountains, it accepted their verticality and carved a permanent solution into their bones. Each massive stone step, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, represents a calculated investment in connection. Building this in the wet, slippery environment of a tropical mountain jungle was an act of profound determination. Workers would have quarried local stone, likely using fire and water to fracture the rock, then shaped and hauled the blocks into position, creating a stairway that could withstand torrential monsoon rains without washing away. This stone spine through the jungle served a very specific economic purpose. It allowed high-value, low-bulk forest products from the Laotian highlands to reach the coast. Porters would climb these stairs carrying sacks of wild cardamom, a fragrant spice coveted across Asia, and bundles of benzoin resin, a aromatic sap used in incense, perfumes, and traditional medicine. These goods, lightweight but incredibly valuable, justified the arduous climb. On the return journey, the porters might carry salt from the coastal evaporators, ceramics or silks from the east, supplying the inland communities with essentials they could not produce themselves. The Fa that Luang Pass transformed an impenetrable ecological barrier into a managed corridor. It funneled the scattered wealth of the highland forests into the mainstream of Asian commerce, proving that even the steepest terrain could be integrated into a trade network, one deliberate, hand-carved step at a time. A hand-carved staircase conquered vertical jungle, but on a wind-swept Danish island, an entire community dug a horizontal shortcut through the earth itself. On Samso, in the 8th century, someone made a startling calculation. The island sat like a stubborn barricade across a vital sea lane, forcing ships sailing between the Viking power centers in Norway and the emerging trade towns of the Kattegat to make a brutal choice. They could attempt the perilous northern tip of the island, exposed to the full fury of the North Sea's gales and treacherous currents, or they could risk the longer, equally dangerous southern passage. Both options meant days of added sailing in some of Europe's most unpredictable waters, a gamble with lives and cargo. The Vikings, however, were master tacticians of geography. Their answer was not to risk the sea, but to cut the island in half. They built the Kanhave Canal. This was no mere drainage ditch. It was a precisely engineered maritime corridor, over half a mile long, 30 feet wide, and dug deep enough to float the shallow draft vessels of the era. The logistics of its construction are staggering to consider. Using only iron-tipped spades, antler picks, and woven baskets, a workforce likely drawn from the local community under the command of a regional chieftain, excavated thousands of tons of peat and clay. They then lined the entire canal with closely fitted vertical planks of oak, creating a wooden walled channel that prevented the soft banks from collapsing and silting up the passage. This wooden lining was the key to its functionality, a deliberate investment in permanence. The canal's strategic value was immediate and profound. For the sleek, oared Viking longships, the Drakkar, it offered a safe, predictable route to shuttle warriors quickly between Baltic raids and home fjords, sheltered from both bad weather and prying eyes. For the broader economy, its true worth was for the broader, beamier cargo ships, the Nar. These vessels were the 18-wheelers of the Viking Age, carrying bulk goods like timber, furs, amber, and whetstones. The canal provided them a protected shortcut, shaving crucial days off a voyage and dramatically reducing the risk of shipwreck. A merchant from Hedeby could now plan a journey to Qhapaq with greater confidence, knowing his vessel and its valuable hold could bypass the island's worst hazards via a calm, man-made channel. This transformed Samso from a navigational obstacle into a strategic hub. Control of the canal meant control of a choke point, a place where tolls could be levied and naval movements monitored. The Kanhave Canal stands as a brilliant rebuttal to the image of Vikings as only raiders and random explorers. It reveals them as systematic planners, willing to undertake a massive, coordinated labor project not for plunder, but for predictable profit and security. It was infrastructure as a shield, a wooden-lined incision across an island, proving that sometimes the fastest route between 2 points is not around the land, but directly through it. While the Vikings cut canals through islands, another civilization faced an even drier challenge, building a port in a place where water seemed a cruel joke. On Egypt's eastern desert coast, where the Red Sea meets a landscape of barren mountains and scorching gravel plains, the Ptolemies founded the port of Berenice. Its location was not chosen for convenience, but for strategic necessity, to capture the monsoon winds that could carry ships directly to India. Here, in one of the most arid environments on Earth, they built a bustling gateway to the riches of the East. The fundamental problem was existential. A port needs people, and people need fresh water. Berenice had none. Not a river, not a spring, just the vast salt expanse of the Red Sea and the relentless desert sun. The solution was a triumph of logistical will. Engineers tapped into the hidden water trapped deep beneath the desert floor, digging complex, deep wells. But evidence suggests they went even further. Historians and archaeologists point to the likely existence of an underground pipeline, a canal system, that may have channeled water from distant, Nile-fed wells across dozens of miles of desert, a secret vein of life buried beneath the sand to sustain the city. This engineered lifeline allowed Berenice to flourish. It became the Roman Empire's premier Red Sea harbor, the terminus for a maritime shortcut to India. Once a year, fleets would depart with the monsoon winds, carrying Roman gold, glassware, and wine. They would return months later, their holds bursting with a cargo that defined luxury: black pepper from India's Malabar coast, sapphires and pearls, Chinese silk, and the fragrant resins of Arabia. This was where the sea journey ended and the land trek began. At the docks of Berenice, these precious, lightweight goods were transferred directly to the waiting backs of camels. Then began the arduous 10-day caravan journey west across the desert to the Nile at Coptos. There, the goods were reloaded onto river barges for the final leg to Alexandria, and from there to the dining tables and wardrobes of Rome's elite. Berenice was not a city in the traditional sense. It was a specialized transfer station, a critical pivot point in a global supply chain. Its entire purpose was to turn the products of the Indian Ocean into cargo for the Mediterranean, its existence made possible only by the invisible, engineered water that flowed against the logic of the desert itself. The desert port of Berenice was a pivot point between seas, but in the dense, rain-soaked jungles of the Yucatan, the challenge was not finding water, but surviving its relentless abundance. Here, the Maya built their civilization in a landscape that spent half the year submerged. During the dry season, travel was possible on hardened ground. But when the rains came, the lowlands transformed into a vast, impassable swamp, a green sea of mud that could isolate communities for months. Their solution was to build roads above the water, a network of raised, paved causeways they called sashiab, or white roads. These were not simple footpaths, but engineered highways of stone and mortar, elevated several feet above the sodden ground. Workers would first lay a foundation of large stones, then pack it with rubble, and finally surface the entire structure with a smooth layer of white limestone plaster. This brilliant white coating was practical. It hardened into a durable, waterproof surface that reflected the moonlight, allowing for nighttime travel. But it was also symbolic, a gleaming ribbon of sacred order laid across the chaotic, dark green wilderness. These causeways connected the essential nodes of Maya life: often linking major ceremonial centers with outlying residential areas, satellite communities, and crucially, marketplaces. One of the most studied examples is the Causeway system at the great city of Koba, which radiated out like stone spokes from a central hub. One sash runs over 62 miles in a nearly straight line to the site of Yaxuna, an astonishing feat of surveying and labor across such difficult terrain. By staying elevated, these roads remained open and firm throughout the rainy season, turning the annual deluge from a paralyzing force into a mere inconvenience. This engineered permanence was the backbone of Maya commerce. Porters moving in long trains could now transport vital goods year-round along these reliable, high-ground corridors. From the highlands came precious jade for ritual carvings and sharp obsidian for tools and weapons. From the coastal regions came salt, an essential mineral for preserving food and enhancing diet. And perhaps most importantly, they carried cacao beans, the source of chocolate, which served not only as a prized beverage for the elite, but also as a form of currency itself. The causeway ensured that this economic bloodstream never clogged. A merchant from the coast could bring his salt to a major inland market like Tikal, knowing the white road would guide him through the floods and return with a load of highland obsidian, all on a predictable schedule. The Sashiob did more than move goods. They integrated a politically fragmented world of rival city-states into a coherent economic zone. They allowed ideas, artistic styles, and even news of astronomical events to flow alongside the sacks of cacao and blocks of jade. In a land where water sought to divide, the Maya built bridges of stone that connected, proving that civilization could not just survive in the swamp, but thrive upon it, walking on roads they lifted from the very earth that tried to swallow them. But a gleaming white road through a jungle is a monument to central power. In the mist-shrouded moors of southwest England, infrastructure took on a humbler, more democratic form. Dartmoor is a vast, treeless expanse of rolling hills, peat bogs, and fast-flowing streams, a landscape that seems to swallow sound and path alike. For the farmers, tin miners, and shepherds who lived there, crossing this wet, treacherous ground was a daily hazard. Their solution was born from the granite bones of the moor itself, the clapper bridge. These are not arched wonders of engineering, but exercises in elegant simplicity. Builders would select massive, flat slabs of local granite, some weighing several tons, and with immense effort haul them into position. They would first construct sturdy stone piers in the stream bed, then lay these colossal slabs directly across them, creating a solid, stable deck. The name clapper itself likely comes from an old word meaning to bridge a stepping stone. That is precisely what these structures were, giant, permanent stepping stones that refused to be washed away by the moor's frequent flash floods. Their durability was their genius. Unlike wooden bridges that would rot in the constant damp or earthen causeways that would dissolve into the mire, a well-built clapper bridge could last for centuries, seemingly growing from the landscape it served. This was hyper-local, community-built infrastructure. A bridge might be constructed by a local landowner to access his tin works, or by a village collectively to get their sheep to market. Each one solved a very specific problem, turning an impassable bog or a dangerous river crossing into a reliable part of the daily round. And what moved across these rough granite slabs was the economic lifeblood of the region. Pack horses laden with rough blocks of tin, Dartmoor's most famous export, would clatter across them on their way to the stannery towns for weighing and taxation. Flocks of hardy Dartmoor sheep, their wool a valuable commodity, were shepherded over these bridges to grazing grounds or to seasonal fairs. Farmers could move cattle and wagons between isolated farmsteads and wider tracts. The clapper bridge made the moor's harsh economy possible, not by conquering the landscape, but by accepting its materials and its constraints. It required no mortar, no complex geometry, just immense slabs and communal effort. In a world of monumental aqueducts and paved highways, these quiet granite bridges remind us that the most essential networks are often the simplest, built not for empires but for the shepherd, the miner, and the flock, turning a wet, whispering wilderness into a traversable home. Granite bridges and desert ports, jungle staircases and mountain canals, each a unique answer to a shared human dilemma. From the Royal Road to the Grand Canal, from the aqueducts of Rome to the tank cascades of Sri Lanka, these 25 projects whisper a unified truth across the centuries. Our ancestors did not wait for geography to cooperate. They studied its harsh logic, then rewrote it with stone, water, and breathtaking ingenuity. The common thread is not merely engineering, but a profound adaptation to necessity. Each structure was a calculated response to an economic imperative, the need to move grain, salt, incense, or gold from where it was abundant to where it was desperately wanted. They built not for glory alone, but for survival and connection, transforming deserts into corridors and mountains into bridges. This was the hidden backbone of pre-modern globalization, a slow-motion internet of physical links that allowed silks from China to reach Rome, Baltic amber to grace Egyptian tombs, and ideas from India to filter into the highlands of Laos. These networks shaped more than trade routes. They shaped history itself, facilitating the exchange of religions, technologies, and artistic styles that defined civilizations. Their legacy is not just in the ruins we admire, but in the very template of our interconnected world. They proved that commerce is a force as powerful as any empire, one that can drive us to move mountains, quite literally, to reach one another. So we turn the question to you. Of all these ancient marvels of logistics, which one leaves you most in awe? Was it the sheer will of Charlemagne's doomed canal, the hydrological genius of Petra, or the community-built simplicity of a Dartmoor clapper bridge? Share your thoughts below and keep exploring the hidden blueprints of our past.